So, picture this, January 3rd, 2026. The world wakes up to some absolutely stunning news. Under the cover of darkness, the United States had just launched this incredibly dramatic military operation right in the heart of Venezuela. It was an action that would, believe it or not, change the course of a nation in just a matter of hours. We're going to break down exactly how it all happened, and maybe more importantly, why.
And this whole thing happened fast. I mean, shockingly fast. A little after 2 in the morning, explosions start ripping through Caracas, hitting key targets, creating total chaos and confusion. This was a classic lightning strike, designed for complete and total tactical surprise. Before the Venezuelan military even really knew what was happening, elite Delta Force operators were already on the ground. And get this, within 45 minutes, it was all over. President Nicolás Maduro and his wife were in custody and being airlifted to a U.S. warship.
So, you're probably wondering, how on earth did they pull this off? Well, the operation was really a masterpiece of military coordination. It was basically a two-pronged attack. The first part was this massive aerial assault. We are talking over 150 of the most advanced aircraft in the U.S. arsenal, F-22s, B-1 bombers, the whole shebang. They effectively blinded Venezuela's defenses. And that, of course, cleared the way for the second prong, the ground raid. These are the most highly specialized units, the best of the best, swooping in to get the job done.
The raid itself, from a purely military standpoint, was a stunning success. But that just brings up the bigger question, right? The one that was echoing in capitals all around the world was just, why? How did things between the U.S. and Venezuela get so bad that it ended in a full-blown military operation to capture a head of state? To answer that, the U.S. administration basically came out and laid out its case, and it was built on 4 distinct pillars. These were the official reasons that, in their view, made such a drastic action not just an option, but an absolute necessity. So let's break them down one by one.
All right, first up, and this is really the main one, the U.S. framed this whole thing not as an act of war against a country, but as a law enforcement action against the leader of a massive criminal organization. The main legal hook they hung this on? The charge of narco-terrorism.
Now, this legal argument wasn't something they just cooked up overnight. It was built on an indictment from way back in 2020. The U.S. Department of Justice had formally accused Maduro and a bunch of other high-ranking Venezuelan officials of running a drug trafficking group they called the Cartel of the Suns. So, in the eyes of the U.S., they were basically painting the entire government as a criminal enterprise. And this quote right here from the Secretary of State, it just perfectly sums up the official U.S. position. As far as Washington was concerned, Maduro wasn't a president anymore, he was a wanted fugitive, a guy who was using the power of the state to run a drug cartel. And that framing, as you can imagine, was absolutely crucial for justifying the operation on the world stage.
Okay, the second justification kind of moves away from the criminal charges and into the political arena. And it all revolves around the presidential election of 2024, which was super contentious. A lot of people saw that election as the real point of no return.
So at the heart of the crisis was this fundamental disagreement. You had 2 completely different stories. On one side, the official government-run electoral council said, yep, Maduro won. But on the other side, you had the opposition, and they were backed by credible international observers like the UN and the Carter Center, and they were presenting evidence showing that their candidate had actually won in a landslide. The U.S. very clearly sided with them, declaring Maduro's presidency totally illegitimate.
And after the election, things got really bad really fast. The regime launched something that became known as Operation Tun-Tun, which was basically this brutal door-to-door campaign to intimidate, arrest, and just silence anyone who questioned the election results. The U.S. flat out called this state terrorism, which just added another layer of urgency to their reasons for intervening.
Right, let's move on to the third reason. And, it's pretty much impossible to talk about Venezuela without talking about its massive energy reserves. This justification is less about law and democracy and a lot more about cold, hard economics and strategic resources.
You really don't have to read between the lines on this one. A statement from the U.S. president himself laid the economic motive out pretty clearly. Look, Venezuela is sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves, but its industry was a complete mess. The plan was simple. The U.S. would lead the charge to rebuild it, and Venezuela's future oil sales would pay for everything, the reconstruction and the military operation.
And that brings us to the fourth and final justification, a massive humanitarian crisis that was spilling across the entire hemisphere. It was creating huge instability for all of Venezuela's neighbors, and that included the United States.
I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 7.7 million people. That is a staggering figure. It's one of the largest displacement crises anywhere in the world. This mass exodus of people, all fleeing hunger and political repression, was seriously destabilizing the whole region. The U.S. argued that stopping this flow at its source had become a matter of regional security.
So Maduro's captured, he's on his way to a New York courtroom. What happens next? Well, the immediate aftermath of Operation Absolute Resolve was just as complicated and contested as the reasons for it. It instantly created these deep divisions, both inside Venezuela and all across the globe.
With the head of the regime gone, you've got a classic power vacuum. The U.S. wasted no time in announcing it was going to fill that vacuum, saying that American officials would basically govern the country for a while. The stated goal? To stabilize Venezuela and oversee a transition to a new government.
And the reaction from the rest of the world? Well, as you can probably guess, it was completely split down the middle. Inside Venezuela, opposition figures who had been fighting the regime for years were celebrating. They called it their hour of freedom. But major world powers like Russia and China were furious. They condemned the whole thing as a blatant violation of national sovereignty and a really dangerous example of American overreach.
And so, at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one huge, unresolved question at the heart of this entire event. Was this a necessary evil, an intervention to get rid of a dictator and bring democracy back to a suffering nation? Or was it just a modern form of imperialism, a powerful country breaking international law to get its hands on resources and impose its will? The answer to that, well, it probably depends entirely on who you ask.